Hello and welcome to In the Spotlight with Quocirca, the definitive podcast on digital disruption in the print industry. I'm Louella Fernandes, CEO of Quocirca, and today I'm joined by Will Parker from Datasec. This is the 5-year anniversary of the Quocirca podcast, and we've got some great guests lined up for this series. Today we'll be discussing the future of identity management in the MPS market. So welcome to the show, Will.
Absolutely. Thanks, Louella. And it's really wonderful to be back, and congratulations on 5 years. That's no mean feat in the podcast business. So happy anniversary, and very honoured to be back on the show.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your role at Datasec?
My name is Will Parker. I lead sales, marketing and strategy for Datasec, an Australian developer company that builds identity and cryptography and cloud-based solutions, predominantly for the Microsoft 365 environment. And we're very, very heavily focused on the identity plane and the move towards identity-centric authentication across the board. I've got 30-odd years in the industry. I've worked for most of the majors in the print business, and I've worked a lot in both security, networking, and content management. So I've got a good broad exposure to how the industry has developed, how multifunction devices and printers have evolved over that time. And I feel like we're in a very, very exciting place right now as things are really evolving in a different way than before.
I know we had a great conversation last time on some of the technology that you brought to market, like you say, in the Microsoft 365 environment. And today we're talking a bit more about identity management. And we've always spoken about print being the weakest link in the security environment. And our research has shown that identity management is becoming a top priority for managing the security of the print infrastructure. But we're still seeing that mostly basic authentication methods are being used. From your perspective, why has identity become the real control plane for IT, and why does that matter specifically for managed print providers and the channel MSPs today?
Yeah, absolutely, Louella. Look, identity's become a huge deal now that we're in a very much a cloud-centric world. So the modern workplace and the modern worker has to basically rely upon the internet connectivity to access the productivity tools and the systems that we're familiar with and have been using for years, but they're now very much in these productivity clouds like Microsoft 365. As a result, every device that we're using to interact with our business and our colleagues and collaborate and use all of the familiar apps, if not through a browser, then at least from our computers, we're basically operating on edge devices. So any device that is connecting to these business systems in the cloud is on the perimeter of the network. As a result, it's exposed to all of the sort of port knocking and penetration attacks and scanning that is happening, on the internet 24/7, every second of every hour, every day. So we really have to take a different view to how the user interacts with these resources in the cloud and through which devices they're interacting. And most of us have become really very comfortable and familiar with, say, Windows Hello on our laptops if we're a Windows user, which basically is a biometric identity-centric sign-in process. It looks at our face, it recognizes us by the characteristics of our face on the camera, and uses some of that, infrared and other mechanisms to determine that it's actually me signing in. There's a couple of things that's really interesting about that. I mean, first of all, the fact that it's me without having to type a password is very convenient. It also means that an attack that is trying to acquire my password for malicious use is harder to achieve because it's phishing resistant. And so as a result, we're seeing two things happening there: convenience for the user, ease and frictionlessness of signing in, but also the ability to confound some of the typical attacks, especially social engineering attacks that people would like to do to compromise my account, to grab a credential that allows me into my account. Because once you get into my account in the cloud, you have access to my OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, Outlook, any number of those. And document and data exfiltration becomes very easy, especially when printers are involved.
Yes, and I think, just to pick up on what you mentioned there about passwords and phishing, I think it's become more evident that those kind of standard traditional passwords and perimeter-based trust models don't really scale for today's cloud-centric environment. So in terms of passwords and legacy authentication models, how do these really present hidden risks for shared print environments?
There's a lot of aspects to this, Louella. So to look at the most obvious ones, we all know that when we're using a shared device, we don't have a device that has, a set of personalized sign-in characteristics. So when we sign in on our smartphone or a tablet, like an Android or an iOS, an iPad or our phones or Windows Hello, we're actually using a personalized device that's got pretty much a sort of a chain of trust between yourself and the device. And the device has sessions that it can store details about your context as a user, the identity context of the user. And whenever we start to go to an IoT device, and that can involve everything from webcams to wireless routers and smart meeting room equipment, but also everyone's favorite collaborative device or shared device in the office, and one of the last devices left on-prem, the multifunction device or printer. We rely on this for our sort of document exchange on a day-to-day basis. We're scanning documents and data in, we're printing documents and data out. And one of the problems with that device is it can't store personalized sessions. That will be coming. There are developments, certainly in the HP world. They're working on a new version of FutureSmart, which will have very much more like a PC kind of approach where you can sign in locally. But that then introduces other issues because the sessions for most of our day-to-day work really do need to roam, move to the cloud and move from printer to printer. So there's a lot of development that needs to be done on these shared devices, which of course, as I said before, are on the perimeter. So they've got to be hardened against the the internet-facing site. They're also not necessarily very convenient to type passwords in on. And here's where we immediately get to a problem. People will switch to a PIN-based system, which is even more weak. You don't even have a possession factor quite often of the type with ATMs. People say, well, we use, PIN numbers for ATMs. Well, yes, but it's a whole different context, possession factors and identity context. When we're signing into a shared device just with a 4-digit PIN number, that's really very insecure and trivially easy to compromise. So you can't have anything really useful and productive on the other side of that PIN number or password, other than maybe releasing printers or releasing print jobs or sending scans to a shared network directory where security isn't really the main concern. The other thing that people would do if they're challenged with their password is immediately make it easier to sign in and make an easier, shorter password to type on the glass. That's not only less secure for cracking, but easier to phish if social engineering, shoulder surfing, and this sort of thing is being done to capture somebody's password. So as soon as, when we looked at what the modern document exchange should be, what I call a smart document exchange, because it should integrate the way that, every other smart device in our ecosystem works, to be able to sign in the way that we expect on any smart device in an identity-native, phishing-resistant, passwordless and convenient way is really the way forward, because on a shared device, you can't leave any credentials or tokens or cache behind. It has to be a new zero trust session each time. And that's a real challenge for the multifunction devices and printers out there.
Yes, and mentioning zero trust, that's something that we've been looking at for a while in terms of zero trust of the IT environment. And in Quocirca's research, it seems to be only a third or even less than a third of organizations are adopting zero trust for their print environment. Why would you say that this is the case? Is it because perhaps organizations are complacent about some of these security risks? So really curious to understand why you think that, MFPs and printers are typically the odd ones out in zero trust security strategies.
It's a great question. I think there's actually one fairly simple answer to it. Most of the printers have grown up in what I like to call a sort of a Galapagos style ecosystem. They've all grown up in isolation under the OEM's developer cycle to have a very proprietary type of operating system that may be based on Linux or Windows CE or something. But essentially, all of the OEMs have developed their own architecture to make a networkable printer scanner a productive device. And a lot of that development was done in the years of the on-prem network. So you're talking about local LAN type TCP/IP. And when we need to start reaching out across the internet and do modern authentication handshakes with Azure tenants and other internet resources, you're really relying on some pretty modern protocols on the internet, not just the encryption using TLS at that basic level, but beyond that, OpenID Connect and OAuth, and Microsoft is now enforcing OAuth 2. So these are developments that all of the manufacturers have to keep abreast of, not just in their firmware, in which they can put fairly basic sort of garden variety ways of connecting to OneDrive or pulling a print job down from Universal Print. But when we want to get more interactive and we want more productivity, we actually have to make an identity native handshake using, as you said, zero trust on the device. And this is hard because you need an extensibility layer, an SDK, a way of developing for that particular platform and its current hardware that can do these modern sort of smart device type things. Is one of the reasons why Datasec is working with HP. The WorkPath platform is a very powerful Android-based platform that allows us to do smart device app-like things directly from the printer, sitting on the network edge. And of course, the HP is underwritten with Wolf security. So it's actually in a very good position to handle that kind of environment. And certainly Datasec has looked at a lot of the SDKs out there, and some of them have, many of them are very capable, but perhaps they've been somewhat slow in their own way to develop a common enough framework. And this is one of the reasons why the industry hasn't come together, for instance, to define a way that generic multifunction printers or devices can join Microsoft Intune and become managed devices. And there are problems with that too, because most Intune managed devices are personal devices, and printers don't get on the train and go home with the user at the end of the day. So, policies and management of the device becomes really quite a trick that the industry hasn't come together to try and solve with Microsoft or other cloud providers. So there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done. The extensibility layer is all important in order to reach out and use OIDC and OAuth 2.
Yes, I think 2026 is really going to be quite a critical year for security in that respect, because you mentioned OAuth 2 and, then the zero trust identity native security opportunity. So for MPS providers, just picking up on the OAuth 2, because recently Microsoft announced that they were delaying the deprecation of basic authentication to December 2026. And I was just curious as to whether you think that is still a significant opportunity for MPS providers to make sure that devices are ready to support that. And you mentioned OEMs needing to kind of embrace that on their firmware and hardware, but I think there's still a lack of clarity as to what that impact is for print security.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think it's a unique position to be in some respects, because when we talk to customers about these concerns and about Microsoft mandating certain security, elevating, tightening the security posture in the organization, we come across a lot of customers who are really not ready for that, and they're continuing on and as though it'll all just sort of get solved in due course. The problem is that this has really become something that needs to be solutioned. It needs to be approached strategically. And what I'm finding quite often is the administrators have moved over to MFA. Most of the tech-savvy people in an organization have been able to flick the switches, and it's already mandatory to have MFA for administrators and so forth. So it's your day-to-day users who just want to get on with their day and be productive that have often been left in this legacy mode where they are relying on, quite often, just Windows Hello on their laptop. And so as a result, a lot of them don't even know their password. And so what you have is this sort of single entry point that's a trusted device, it's got a TPM, and it's managed by the organization, and the user just sits down, it recognizes them, and they sign in, or maybe they've got a Windows PIN. The problem then is if they want to sign into a shared device, they're asked for their username, their UPN in Microsoft terms, and then a password. And if they don't know their password, that has to be reset. This becomes a high friction method of signing in. And so what's interesting is, because the solution we've been working on allows us to move to a pretty much frictionless and convenient passwordless sign-in using any number of different biometric approaches, either using just the phone or a smart card to badge on without any need for a phone, we're actually finding that organizations are seeing printers as being the lead for helping them shift their perspective on how soon they need to move and change. If they need to update their print fleet and they realize that putting in a legacy password-driven authentication and authorization system, that's going to become quite stale after December. So it's sort of helping accelerate or lead the charge in making these developments within organizations happen. And it's quite interesting because print has very rarely sort of led the charge in that sort of IT change.
I guess this is an opportunity for MPS providers because they can then help their customers, those organizations who are still operating legacy print environments and legacy security methods, to upgrade to the latest models, the latest software. And I guess, is that what you would see as well in terms of the opportunity for channel partners and MPS providers to really capitalize on?
I think there's huge opportunity there. And a lot of them have already adopted and done training in and education around the security in the modern office. But it does go further to this identity native approach, and working with customers and their customers to understand that the printer is just part of a larger ecosystem, but it's a very, very important shared device. And the more that the MPS partners can understand what Microsoft is trying to achieve with Windows protected print and introducing MFA and phishing resistance, and then inform their customers on that journey and help them make decisions. Because so often our contracts are 3, 4, 5-year contracts. And so you want, in a sense, a future-proof solution or software to ride along with that device, something that's going to handle the changes in policy that Microsoft is frankly having to implement, because the risks are just too great when exfiltrating documents from printers or from any of our smart devices. So security is paramount. I don't think that the MPS partners and salespeople need to be experts in this space, but they need to be able to work with people like us who understand the space, because you can't be an expert in this particular domain without focusing your career on it. And the MPS guys are not. They are still having to sell print, sell scans, sell solutions to customers. And that's where it's so important to be able to reach out to partners who understand and who can translate between, the technology and the business.
Yes, and I think Microsoft really has had a huge impact, hasn't it, over the last year in terms of it re-engineering the printing subsystem, like you mentioned, WPP, and now the impact of OAuth 2. And I think it's really important that MPS providers are aware of that impact, and also means that they can move more to being that trusted partner for their customers around security, not just the hardware devices, but the broader IT security infrastructure as well.
And also what you can do with the devices once they become a smart document exchange within the Microsoft ecosystem. Once you embed the device and you have an identity native approach to signing in, you've really got a lot of productivity that you can do at the device that we haven't seen before. I mean, the big leaps in development across the decades that I've been involved in the industry have included, the first digital devices, the emergence of, the scanner printer as well as copier type device, replacing, a whole lot of desktop single function devices with these sort of hubs, document hubs, larger devices with more power and more capability. And color and, very, very high quality color, very fast speeds. There's been a lot of evolutions over that time, but we're really seeing, I think, a new era where these devices need to become smart devices, what I call a smart document exchange, and integrate natively with the technology as a proper IT device. And that means considering things like IoT Hub, Intune, and other mobile device management, even though they're not mobile. They do need to be managed, because we absolutely need to know in the security context that the printer that I'm talking to today is the same actual device as it was yesterday, because if that could be spoofed, then you can start doing attacks even on MFA and biometric type systems and things. So, this chain of custody of the authority of the identity of the printer is actually just as important as the identity of the user who's accessing these cloud resources.
Yeah, so very much this smart document exchange approach is really changing the potential MPS business model, I guess, over the next few years, and it's helping customers to future-proof their print environment, as you say, to support these new methods of authentication and security risks and so on. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, if a business has already selected Microsoft 365 for everything from the familiar Office apps that, we think of Microsoft Office as almost like a household name. Everyone knows Word and Excel. In the same way that we think of PDFs as being just an obvious document format. And so the opportunity there to actually guide the customer into a much more productive use of the technology. It's more now of a solutioning problem than a hardware problem. And the stickiness that you can get by integrating this powerful device when it comes to handling double-sided pages, tabloids and letter A4 and A3, the large sizes, scanning receipts off the glass, as well as big hotel bills off the document feed. I mean, most of us will scan receipts when we're traveling and put them in our expenses folder in OneDrive using our phone. And it's terrific, against a contrasting background, it crops the document perfectly. The problem is that we find, especially if you've got a large number of receipts and there's some A4 and some of different sizes, you're constantly trying to get the shadow out of the picture that you're snapping, and you've got to save them one at a time and name them. This is what these devices are best at. And so a native integration with our OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, and Outlook type systems, along with a print capability like universal print, becomes a sort of necessary and natural evolution. If not always, and a lot of people will still need a lot of the advanced rules and routing and departmental cost recovery and accounting solutions from the tried and trusted enterprise grade print solutions out there. Roaming print solutions out there. But what Microsoft will bring to the table now is really, a one-stop shop, an end-to-end solution. If you just want to pick up your print, if you want to be able to work with your OneDrive, your expenses folder is going to be there. You're going to see it, recognize it, and put as many documents in as many formats as you like in there immediately and just walk away, rather than having to set the laptop up or use the phone and transfer it by multiple steps.
Yes, it's very much about a platform approach, isn't it, to security, because ultimately Microsoft own that platform around 365, and we are seeing that print volumes are obviously declining, but offsetting that is a rise in scan volumes. And equally, we're also seeing the emergence of agentic AI. So I was curious as to what you think in terms of how to secure scanned documents from these AI agents, which are potentially going to be impacting digital workflow automation.
We've got so many challenges from a security standpoint when working with AI. I mean, I just go back to the Siri paradox. In order to hear, "Hey Siri," Siri has to be listening to every single thing that you're saying. Now, in order for an agent to be able to recognize what's in your email inbox, it has to read all of your emails. And one of the things is that, unlike a service account, which would run particular jobs every night, according to, say, a cron tab, a set of scheduled tasks, and that account is logged and it's got particular permissions. If agents are allowed to make autonomous decisions about things, we're going to need not only a good way of logging what they do, but knowing that that is the specific agent that did it. Because these, as we've seen with OpenClaw just recently, that these things are able to just, propagate. And so I sort of imagine, and it comes down to something Paul Waite talks a lot about, which is the identity of everything, sort of like the internet of everything. The identity of everything is going to need not only biometrics for us, but probably digimetrics for the agents. We're going to need some sort of a digital fingerprint to say that that agent acted on behalf of this user to do a particular task. And so when it comes to putting agents on the devices, again, they're going to be able to work with any of the data that they're exposed to once you're signed in. And once again, that means it has to be a very hard identity-centric sign-in. And then the agent has to be able to be managed in a discrete way. This is another reason why working in a purely north-south traffic approach, that is from the printer as an endpoint to the productivity cloud that we're working in, and not relying on any east-west connections where the scan goes out for processing before it comes back in. We're going to see just the necessity for customers to work in their tenant, because their Copilot account, a lot of their agents running on Copilot without bleeding information out to the large language model on the net, are going to then rely upon a native integration to their cloud. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of it, but it's a huge topic. We don't have all of the answers to this yet, but the privacy concerns, potential for data loss, and exfiltrating documents and things is huge.
As I say, in 2026, it's going to be really critical for MPS providers to understand the importance of securing identity. And I really like that phrase, identity of everything, because MFPs are still often the overlooked element of the overall IT environment, even though I'd say that's a mixture of complacency and lack of priority in terms of looking at other elements of the IT environment. But I think for MPS providers that really understand this identity native cloud-centric approach to security, they can really gain really strong opportunities from helping those customers and guiding those customers to really future-proof their complete print and capture environment. So it's been really interesting to hear about Datasec's Smart Document Exchange approach. So where can listeners or viewers get more information on Datasec and SDX?
Smart Document Exchange, we have the best place to look at the sort of work that we've been doing would be the datasec.com.au website, but also the HP Authentication Suite, which is a product set that is really world first class, first example of true badge release within this identity native space for Microsoft Universal Print. It's a very exciting product set. And, and it works to these principles that we bring to the table in everything that we design and the way that we think about what our customers need. And productivity is first, because people don't sign into these devices for fun. They sign in to get something done. Now, the security piece is the central pillar of the story, but then convenience is what actually makes it all work and makes it both secure and productive. So productivity, security, and convenience without compromise is our philosophy. And, I'm actually looking forward to launching a blog fairly shortly around the Smart Document Exchange concept, where I'm hoping to sort of, just share my thoughts about where the industry is going, not to be, product-centric so much as industry, technology, and trend-centric. So that'd be quite exciting, and I'll share that with you as soon as that happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's always great talking to you, Will, because you get a real sort of technical perspective of the market, yep, but also the importance for why customers and MPS providers need to really understand this opportunity and how they can balance the productivity with security, because like you say, it's security has to be something that doesn't hamper a user experience. So always great to understand more about where you're going and Smart Document Exchange.
Thank you very much, Louella. It's always a great pleasure to read all of your material and to join you in a conversation like this. Thank you.
So thank you for joining today's episode of In the Spotlight with Quocirca. For more information, please visit quocirca.com and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.